and it's lights, cameras, action. Well executed, I'm the main attraction. Engaging vibes is where I wanna be. Enchanting lights and smiles is all you see. So I ain't thinking about the next one. Snapping pics, they be loving my fashion. Great drinks, great friends, and it's flowing well. It's the perfect event. Shout out Rielle.
We started off our day with Black women from different generations. Hi, Jackie. Jackie moderated that panel. I learned a lot. I got a better sense of how we're thinking about this election, and like for people from all over the country. And then I'll get started as Tiara comes over to ours, and I'm sure Shirley will help her with making sure she's here. And she's sharing her screen if it doesn't automatically pop up. But I'll get started. First, I want to kind of tell our audience that it is free to chat. Please talk to us. We like it. Hype us up. Let us know when we're talking about something that you like, because we want to talk about things that you care about. If you have any questions, drop those into the chat section. We would love to answer them throughout the panel. And then, okay. So I'll introduce you first as Tiara comes over to this panel. I have Jonathan Acosta here. He's running for senator in Rhode Island, District 16, which is Central Falls. Jonathan is a father, an educator, an Eagle Scout, youth wrestling coach, and a PhD student in sociology at Brown University. He was a middle school math teacher in Miami-Dade County and Central Falls before becoming a school administrator. During this time, he earned a MA in urban education policy at Brown and implemented a district-wide teacher evaluation program in cultural competence. Okay, let me not stop because I really want to add my own feedback there because we really need that right now. Jonathan is a member of the Juvenile Hearing Board and a city councilman representing Ward 1 in Central Falls, where he has been a strong voice for responsible green city planning, transparency in governance, and affordable housing. So I'm really excited to have you here with us. We also have Tiara Mack, who's joining us. I think Shirley's helping her find our panel. And she is running for the Senate in Rhode Island District 6, so Providence area, which you know all about. And she's a Black queer woman, formerly low income, Ivy League educated activist, and an educator. She started her work in activism, teaching sexual health education in Providence public schools while she was an undergraduate. So she was already doing it all before she even had the diploma. Now she's a youth organizer, empowering young people to engage in the local and national social issues. And she's also board member of the Health and Education Fund and the Abortion Fund in Rhode Island. And then I'm Rielle Jones. I'm your moderator for this panel. I am the creator organizer of the Black America Summit. I started this event series in June to be a response for our Black communities and allies to come together to talk about the different ways COVID was impacting the Black community. So we talked about finance, we talked about health, we talked about health also including child abuse or domestic abuse. We talked about health, finance, and like two other topics. I don't know why I'm blanking right now, but a lot of different things. And people wanted us to engage a conversation around the 2020 election. Why is it really important? And also the things that Black America is thinking about that we really haven't heard our elected officials talking about, or the people perhaps who are running. So the first question I had was an opening question, and it's, what are the top 2 issues you hope to address in the Senate?
Yeah, that's heavy. So I'll start by saying thank you to you for putting this together and for having us on this panel, and to Corey who kind of connected us. I really appreciate that, and happy to be on here with my fellow co-op member who will hopefully be on the screen soon, Tiara Mack, and fellow Brown alum. So, and I guess as far as I don't want to not answer the question, but what I will say about this question in particular is that we so often get asked, what's the thing? Or what are the top two things? And one of the things that I've been trying to push back on is saying we need to think bigger than this and be way more coordinated. And so Tiara and I, as I kind of alluded to, are part of this group called the Rhode Island Political Cooperative. And what are the founding of the group was really, we need to have a slate of candidates who all agree to this minimum set of policy implementation. And we'll go in through those as we go through the session, but those include, and these would be amongst my top two, increasing taxes on the wealthiest households in our state. So in our state, that's households who make above $467,000 a year. In my district, that's nobody. So nobody in my district lives in a household that's in that tax bracket. But if we implemented even a modest increase in that group, and we've done the math, we're talking about $120-something million a year in revenue. And in COVID times, when we're talking about austerity measures and budget cuts, this would be a huge support in shoring us and getting us out. Related to increasing taxes on the wealthy is also making sure that working class families earn a living wage. And so part of our platform was a $15 minimum pegged to inflation over time. And right now, as I was kind of scratching at it, I live in the most low-income community in the state of Rhode Island. My district is the poorest district in the state of Rhode Island. And it was these people that kept working and that didn't have the option of working from home during the pandemic. And so I think it's nice that people want to talk about heroes and put up banners and, share all these Instagram posts and shit like that. But, it's really about show them the money, right? Like, pay them fairly, pay them so that they can live a decent life. And that means a $15 minimum wage. And so that and increasing taxes on the wealthy are amongst the top of our priority list, but we have a bigger platform that we've been working on and that we want to do all at the same time, and especially now that we have critical mass. We had some pretty big wins in our primary here, and we're expecting more in the general. So we're hoping to be able to move this progressive agenda forward.
I know our last panel talked a bit about the minimum wage and why they felt like that was the top issue to address. They said, for a lot of families, if we can focus on raising the minimum wage, then on the other hand, they'll have more bandwidth to talk about other issues, because when you don't have any money, you're not thinking about all the other things that, could be impacted or whatever, because you're just like paycheck to paycheck, living like in the moment. Is my reality changing right now? That kind of thing. What motivated you all to target minimum wage as one of the top issues that you want to talk about and promote?
Being poor is expensive. Being poor is taxing. It takes time. And so I think to that point, we want to give people the opportunity to not have to worry about tomorrow or their meal on the plate today. We had agreed to this before the pandemic hit, and I think what COVID did was really open people's eyes to how bad things were before and how much worse they could become when something unexpected like a pandemic hit. And so in Central Falls at the height of COVID, our infection rate was higher than New York City. And, we're a very dense place. So we're a city that's only 1.2 square miles, but we have more than 20,000 people living here. And doing testing, we were surveying people who were coming in. And something like about a third of folks were living in households making less than $24,000 a year. That's criminal, right? Like, how is it that we're supposedly in the wealthiest, most developed country in the world, and yet you have people in households of 4 plus living off $24,000 a year? Like, it's ridiculous. It's absurd. And like I said, I think it amounts to something criminal, what's really happening. So that just gave us kind of more oomph to say, look, we need to pay people now. And we also know that folks who aren't making enough money to live, as soon as they make a little bit more money, they spend it. So it helps our economy to give our lowest earners a fair and living wage. And I'm sure Tiara has thoughts on this, and welcome, yo. Thanks for coming.
Welcome. Right. Sorry for the struggles.
No.
You're in here now.
I was like, I'm gonna be here 15 minutes early, 10 minutes.
You were.
Internet was like, no, 2020 always had its own mind. But yeah, just like what Jonathan was saying, I was able to hear what you were saying in the background. But yeah, being poor is expensive. And it's also, being poor is a larger burden on the state. When you think about how many social programs, I was just looking at this morning, when you implement reproductive health measures in states like Colorado in 2009, they gave free IUDs to every teenager. It reduced the number of teen pregnancies. It reduced the number of abortions in the state. It also lowered the amount of money they were putting into the welfare system to pay for things like food stamps. And it sucks that you have to make a argument about the social safety nets that should be there for people, but let's give people access to keeping their lives on track where they want to. Like, there is literally less money if you invest money in making sure that people have bodily autonomy, making sure that people have clean and livable air, making sure that people have homes where they feel secure and don't have to rely on 2 to 3 jobs. Like, in the long time, it literally saves us money because you have less people who are relying on social safety nets, less people who are relying that my family also used, like food stamps, like WIC, and like several other free and reduced lunch programs that happen in schools. Again, it like literally costs less if you were putting more money in the front end of the system and not waiting for all the bad things to catch up with people.
Yeah. And like, even building off of that, something Amanda was talking about was like the mental health aspect of it. When you have 2 or 3 jobs, you're tired, you're stressed, and like, how do you interact with the people around you? How do you interact with your kids? You know, like, how do you communicate at that point? Because at that point, you don't want to answer any questions. You don't want to hear anything else. Like, please leave me alone. Let me go sit down. Let me go enjoy my like whatever.
Yeah.
But taking a step back of like talking about people who, when you earn more money, you're spending more money, and when you haven't had as much like access to money, you're more mindful of it. At least from my perspective, I know I went from living paycheck to paycheck to like having like a really good job. And even during this pandemic, because I do have a little bit extra money, I've been thinking, okay, what about my friends who are artists, you know, who like no longer have places where they can show up their artwork and stuff like that, or sell, like, what are they going to do? And they might not be able to have, tap into some of the other systems. So you might be more mindful, or like a lot of my friends are a part of the queer community. And so like they've been impacted in different ways already before the pandemic and then after the pandemic. So like hearing, oh, I need a little help. It's like, you don't even need to tell me why. I'm about to send you something. Just tell me how much and I can do the most that I can. I think that there's something like the social awareness aspect of, you know, people who been in a struggle and like are able to have more access to the capital. What do y'all think about that? Maybe it's just me.
I think it's a little optimistic. The president of the American Sociological Association, Alden Morris, put out an article recently saying that he hopes that this experience, what he calls these triple crises of economic, just like uncertainty and downturn across our society, of the pandemic threatening people's health, and of racial, social unrest, will give really white people, for the first time in a long time, the second sight to realize how everybody else is living. Like, oh, all of a sudden you guys don't have work. Well, guess what? We had high levels of unemployment before this started, and now they're just worse now. Like, you guys are worried about your health. Well, so were we this entire time. And so I read his article as maybe a little bit overly optimistic, but I think you're right. Like, we should be more aware of how everyone is doing right now, because many of the people close to us are not doing well. Some of us as individuals are not doing that well. But I hope that we take action. It has to be actionable, and it can't be like the short run kind of GoFundMe help out. It needs to be, we need to change society, the structure, the way that society supports people. To Mack's point, right, expanding the social safety net, I think, is key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like mutual aid versus charity. Charity does not work, but when we're all bought into a system that ignores individualism and that treats communities as networks of people helping each other out to make ends meet, you get past individualism and you get folks who are engaging in mutual aid. Like, I have an extra spare dollars. Like, of course, I'm going to spend $20 on Friends Art. Of course, I'm going to spend $50 to go into the National Bail Fund, to go into the Healthy Eating Fund for young, low-income families that can't even afford to the gas money that it takes to get the free and reduced lunch from the school down the street, or don't have parents who are not frontline workers who can then take them on the bus route to get the free and reduced breakfast, lunch, and dinner that's provided at the school. And baby's 8 years old and can't navigate the bus system by themselves, and there's no other adults in their life that can get it. So it's really about seeing these problems like all interconnected and not about individualism anymore. And I think that's what this crisis also highlighted. For a long time, Black and brown communities have had to rely on uncles, aunts, play uncles, yo auntie's auntie, yo great auntie, like lay down the street, like miss whoever in the church, your church mother, your church brother, the deacon, everybody. Like, that was your network, and that's who you relied on. Like $20 here and there, that was always coming to us. And now that like white folks are like having to sit like, oh, what's mutual aid? It's like, oh, like the Black community's been doing this for a hot minute. Like, it's not just tied to Calvin Sunday. It's, okay, these people need a little bit of help. Okay, like this play cousin over here, like this cousin, this person in the community needs help. We all pull together. And I think it's finally showing them like, oh, wait, you mean communities can survive and sustain themselves when everyone's bought into the idea that it's our collective responsibility to take care of the community. It's not just, well, I'm good and I've been good. And it's like, no, we're all bad now. So now you actually have the 40 hours a week to not be focusing on your job and to really focus on the human condition that we're now all kind of like having to settle with. Like, if all aspects of life were interrupted when the pandemic came, what does that say about the system? What does it say about a system that falters within weeks, within months of a global pandemic? It says that we can't sustain, and we had no infrastructure set up for communities to be networks where people can rely on them. Our government's not set up to have a social safety net to take care of our people in light of a global pandemic, unlike several other countries. So I think it has only highlighted it, and hopefully people now can like sit with, oh, like it wasn't just a pandemic. This was a critical shift in how we frame the US narrative of how we take care of people and what is considered life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness when we don't have access to life if you don't have a livable wage. You don't have access to liberty if you are one of the frontline workers who also has 3 other frontline working jobs, or your kids are at home learning from a computer if you have one, or a tablet, but you've got 5 kids who've got 1 tablet, and there's no internet or stable internet in the home because you can't afford that 5G mess. And then all those other things that happen.
So I'm thinking about what John said as like he had 2 kind of things we're looking at, right? We're looking at minimum wage and then perhaps taxing the wealthiest households. In my spirit, that makes sense. In my spirit, that's like, yeah, tax the people who can afford it. It won't, for the most part, impact their lives as much as, taxing the poor impacts their lives and like gets them in these spirals of debts and high interest rates and predatory stuff, whatever, right? But then we've been living through this pandemic. We've been seeing all the excuses. And I come from the South. I come from a really well-off like prep school and all of that. Like, I don't come from this very well-off or whatever. And I know a lot of conservatives, like true conservatives, not just like people who are like, sipping a Kool-Aid or whatever right now, but like true, who will ride anything out in the hopes of fiscal cuts, and like making like tax breaks for them, and how much they will put in the system behind people just so they can have those tax breaks, I don't know right now personally how confident I am that anybody in power right now is going to let that fly. So I'm really interested in hearing what makes you all confident that y'all can increase the tax of the wealthy, or like even that it's going to get some traction. I want to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to go first, Jonathan, or you want me to chime in?
I'll pontificate with rap lyrics all the time and saying, it's a lot of them, but it's more of us. So not, to your point about people in power, now it's us in power. And my predecessor, when the bill was first introduced to increase the tax rate, the first person to speak out against it was my predecessor. And what she said was, well, aren't we afraid that the wealthiest Rhode Islanders will leave us for a neighboring state? And I had 2 thoughts on that. The first is, None of those people live in your district. Your job is to represent the people right here. Plus are those households that are going to get taxed. So you're not doing your I was about to curse. Well, I just kind of you're not doing your job. All right. So do your job. Now, the second thought that I had was she can't be the only one who feels like that. And so we need a group shift. And when we decided to run as a group, that was part of the move for me. I'm more on the like nerdy academic side. I'm not a big fan of the politics. You could probably tell just even by the way I'm presenting today. Like I'm not going to put on a dog and pony show for anybody. And so when I got in and they were kind of recruiting me to join this bigger group, I was like, look, I'm only doing it if it's big enough for it to take root, and if it's not about any of us as individuals, but about the policies that we're representing. And I think the way that at least the Rhode Island electorate speaks, I can't say nothing about Georgia. I can't say I grew up in Miami, so I'm definitely saying this about Florida right now. But the way the Rhode Island on average voter feels is much more on our side than on that side. And so we've started to see that with some of our wins. In fact, the guy who put the bill forward, honestly, was not a very progressive guy. And that's why he lost his race. So there's a new person in his seat who's even, pushing this even harder. So I think we have the numbers now. I also feel like we need to take advantage of this momentum and keep pushing people to come out. Like I've been really energized by the way youth have been acting during this election cycle, by their engagement. And it's not just the kind of traditional rah-rah, like we have signs. I remember like marching down Brown shirtless when Obama got elected. And I thought like that was somehow activism or something. But like these people were phone banking, they were door knocking, they were like soliciting donations, they were writing op-eds. And I think that's true not just for the young generation, but for a lot of other people that tend to be pretty disaffected and disengaged. So I think we need to keep that momentum going rather, and keeping them in the loop. So, I would love to host like a monthly or like a bi-weekly podcast or video session where people know what's going on in their state house. Because usually you just read the headlines at the end of the legislative session. That's it. You're like, oh, we lost that. Or like, oh, we got one win. Last year, frankly, that was, and Tiara played a big role in this. You can speak a little bit more. The Women's Reproductive Health Care Act, right? Like, big win. We enshrined Roe v. Wade in state law in Rhode Island, but that was pretty much all we got. That was the only like positive thing that came out of the last legislative session. And it should be like that. Like you should know what's on the docket, what's on the agenda. The only way we do that is by having more transparent, more open elected officials who are also representing the interests of their community and doing it explicitly and openly, rather than special interests. I don't know. What do you think, Mack?
Jonathan, I wish we were up there together because I'm just here like, yep.
That would have me move out there, okay?
And then we're going to be up there together. We're just going to be sitting there like, I mean, speak on it. But
you need to look to the city like, did they just say, go up there and get some collective people now?
I would be like, did they just? Okay, but I was writing down my thought as well as like shaking my head vigorously as we were going, because it is a shame that we only got the RPA passed last year. And that was the biggest campaign, hundreds of thousands of dollars, a coalition of over 30 organizations, people at the State House every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from like 8 a.m. to sometimes 6 a.m. testifying. Like these were targeted phone calls, targeted postcards. And literally at the same time, there was also the doula bill, which is making sure that Black and brown moms had access to a doula, especially covered under Medicaid, so that we could address the Black maternal health crisis. That was literally drowned out by access to safe legal abortion. Both are super important, but when we're talking about I don't think anything should be like, oh, we really need this and we really need this. Like, why can't we have it all? Because like the money and resources are there if we have people who are caring about what's happening. And yes, some people are not there with tax breaks, but like we said before, being poor is literally expensive for the state. If we also, and I hate doing this, but I grew up in the South. I grew up around conservative. I don't know all of their things, but I've had to hear their rhetoric. I've had to like listen to what it is that goes through their head. And I'm like, well, let me just tell you the facts. Like, you don't have to believe that it's good, right, and moral to give people access to shelter, to food, to clean air, to water, to a livable wage. You don't have to believe all that. If your end goal is saving money, let's talk about ways that we can systematically save money through a system by changing how it works, not just reforming, but like literally saying, if we start with defunding the police, which is a super polarizing topic, why do we need $55 million set aside for new state trooper barracks in Rhode Island? We could use that money to go into the privatized or into the public health system. We could use that money to pay for free and reduced lunch programs in schools so that no one has to go hungry or get one of those like Sun sandwiches, which is just like peanut butter and jelly on bread because your parents can afford 25 cents a day for your lunch. It's also making sure we legalize marijuana. We can bring all of that tax money into our economy. That's money that's going back into Rhode Island. We could use that for education. We could use that for the health system. We could use that for making sure and ensuring that everyone has a livable wage and a livable salary of at least $50,000 to $55,000 a year for every single family that's not currently making that at their jobs. It's also decriminalizing different activities. If we stop decriminalizing things, if we stop decriminalizing poverty, if we stop over-criminalizing people based on their zip code, based on their skin color, and based on circumstances that are now legal, that's less money that's going into the prison system. That also impacts recidivism. If we have stronger social programs so that people, when they exit the prison system unjustly, we can have lower recidivism rates, which means that's less money going into the prison system. That's less money that we are having to spend on a prison system. And that's more money that goes back into your pockets, into the community, getting you more parks, getting you more clean areas, getting you more community gardens, getting you better air, getting you that fancy like car charging station for your Tesla because like it's like public property now. Like if you want it, you can have it. All you have to do is make sure we lower recidivism, make sure that we decriminalize marijuana and opioids and put it back into the medical system. Imagine if we decriminalize the opioid epidemic and we make it a medicalized system. All the money that we're spending per prisoner now goes to per person in a treatment program. Like it's literally one for one. Why can't we see the world as, well, let's stop spending money where we're just causing more problems and put it into solutions, which then stop the money sucking problems. And then
have to stop shaming people, though. We'd have to stop shaming people for not being as educated or whatever, or for smoking or having whatever free time. Like we'd have to like.
But we don't, because it happens in white neighborhoods all the time. Look at all of the rehab programs that happen in wealthy and well-off neighborhoods. Look at all the programs that are diverting their young people from the prison system into things like in-person rehab or community service programs. They have those programs, they exist in wealthy communities, but when it comes to low-income Black, Brown, Indigenous folks are like, put them in prison. It's like, but for your kid who had the Oxycontin in his bag from his accident or from your accident, he just gets a diversion program. Like, why does it work for y'all, but not for this zip code? And then we can also flip the narrative. If the system that you are so bought into relies on harm to one group of people, why not shift the subject of that harm to the top? Literally, there's less of them. So if we shift the burden of harm in a system that says that someone has to be exploited, why can't the exploitation be from the top 1% by giving them an increased tax bracket so that the largest amount of harm isn't impacting people on the ground and it's happening to the top? Literally more taxes. We also see examples of that in countries like the Netherlands and Denmark and Amsterdam. Like they're all paying like crazy high taxes. They're also like so much happier and healthier and just like love their countries and just like in the streets with all substances legal. Like,
well, and if I could just kind of jump back in real quick, you know, I'm a much bigger fan of equity than equality. But
go deeper. Don't go for it. Go deeper than that.
I think the way that politics and practice works, equality is much sexier. So I'm willing to entertain a conversation that goes down those lines. But in order to do that, the kind of other side needs to concede and come in and say, hey, look, all right, we're not asking that wealthy folks pay more in taxes. We're actually asking that they pay the same share that low income folks pay.
Right.
We're asking for equality here, not equity. Let's look at corporations. You know, I've in my bio, you spoke a little bit about housing, and one of the things that really bothers me is the way that corporations just railroad us with tax stabilization agreements. And so these are long-term TSAs that really come with nothing. You have these developers coming in and telling you, we are blessing you with our presence. That's what you get. You get our presence. And for 12 years, we don't pay taxes. You know, I'm going to throw my own city, my own team under the bus. I'm deep in enemy territory. The Miami Heat are in the playoffs. I'm a big Miami Heat fan. But the Miami Heat built the American Airlines Arena 2 blocks from one of the poorest neighborhoods in Miami-Dade County. And in 15, maybe 20 years, they've paid less than $1 million in taxes. We won 2 championships, went to the finals 4 times, had sold out attendance year after year after year. They paid no taxes because they're a corporation. Now, as a fan of affordable housing, I've said, look, if you're going to get a tax stabilization agreement, you have to do something in the form of affordable housing for it. If you don't want to do it, you're not interested in that, then fucking pay taxes. You can do whatever you want. You can charge whatever rent you want as long as you pay your full taxes. Because when you're doing that, we're facing a double bind. We're now under-resourced because we have less money than we should have. And all of our local public utilities are being overburdened. We have more people using roads. We have an old decaying sewage system and water system that now is being strained because we brought in all these people who don't pay taxes. So I think when you talk to some fiscal conservatives and open their eyes to the fact that these people are getting off and off your back, right? Like, these are your roads too. This is your plumbing and sewage system too. And they're not paying taxes for 12 years. Just let's start doing the math on these 12 years. And it starts at the local level. You know, we're seeing some of those ordinances here in municipal government, but it goes up to the state level and all the way up to the federal government, and the way they created opportunity zones so that folks could reinvest their money instead of paying taxes on it, and reinvest that money with tax stabilization agreements that they don't have to pay taxes on as they're profiting off the profit that they didn't have to pay taxes on. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So we've talked quite a bit about taxes, how people might be avoiding paying, or corporations might be avoiding paying taxes, how the wealthy are trying to avoid increasing their tax. And ultimately, you all are saying, like, either we increase our tax or reallocate our money more effectively. But we've been seeing under this Senate that Mitch really doesn't let much come through. You know, for a lot of the Black people I've been talking about, they're like, even if Joe Biden wins the election, what if Mitch is still there? They haven't really been hearing as much of, like, the possibility of flipping the Senate blue. So my first question is, like, do you feel like that's attainable? Do you feel like we can flip it blue? And if so, what would you think that impact would be?
So I'm going to not answer the question again, but go in a route that's related to it. And Tiara knows this about me because we've been in heated discussions with the groups that we're in. And my problem with the way that we're thinking about this moment and the way that we think about governing in general is that it's always about us in power, right? So, like, how do we get empowered? How do we get Chuck rather than Mitch? I think they both suck, but more importantly, I think I should be able to live in a world where Mitch won. I think I should be able to live in a world when Chuck won. And for that reason, I think this is about procedural reform and how we change the way that the chamber works, right? So in Rhode Island, at the state level, the Democrats rule, right? And so we've been in power so long that we actually have our own internal hierarchy, right? Like, if the leadership doesn't like you, your bill never sees the light of day. It doesn't matter how good the bill is. It doesn't matter how forward-thinking. Frankly, it doesn't matter how easy it would be to implement and maybe inexpensive. It's never going to see the light of day because the Senate president has to allow it to come to the floor. That's bullshit. I would rather live in a world where I'll be happy out of power than need to be in power to get the things that we need out of this. And so we need to be talking about procedural reform. It's why some people are talking about expanding the court, right? And so we need to reform the way that bills make it to the floor. It shouldn't have to be a popularity contest. If there are enough sponsors, then it should automatically go to a floor vote. If you don't like me or you don't like the content of the bill, then you should be voting in public. Like, we're all public officials. Like, this have to happen behind closed doors where all like I'm somehow earning my right to then bring this to the floor. That's my problem with the way this is going. I will say to your question, I think it is possible that we flip. It's little bit of a long shot, but nothing's impossible. When that does happen, though, and the next time we're in power, I think we need to start thinking about how we set up reforms that we can be happy the next time we lose it, instead of always playing like we need to be in power in order to get anything done. I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah. Again, I always like having these conversations because I feel like we kind of go back and forth between being reformist or revolutionaries. I am an eternal optimist, and I also believe in fully overhauling the systems and not playing by the game that they literally set up for us to play. But I agree with Jonathan. The rules should be so good that we should not have to be in power. The rules should be so good that every 4 years, every 6 years, every 8 years, we get new leaders, and the world doesn't just completely shift in how it works, whether it's at the municipal level, the state level, or the federal level. The rules should be so good that it works no matter who is in power. Whether or not they're quote unquote good or quote unquote bad, the rules should work. Our country should literally be able to stand the change of power and not have dramatic shifts in what is available, what are considered human rights, and what people have access to during an 8-year period, point blank period. And again, I'm an eternal optimist. I'm like, let's just build something new. Like, why are we continuing to have to play by their rules and by games that they literally set up for us to have hurdles, whether or not they're Democrats who do it against Democrats, or Democrats who like are going against this like neoliberal or like progressive or like moderate grain, or if it's the Republicans, they still have games that we are being forced to play into. We have to leverage. If I want to do this, I have to scratch your back this way. If I want this for my community, I'm going to have to like make this concession here. The health and safety and like livability of our community should not be dependent on concessions here and concessions there. It should be, we are doing things that make the greatest impact for the greatest number. And again, that's an idealistic way of thinking about things. I can just like hope, wish, and pray that people also see our communities as places that we all need to take care of. I know that's not the reality, but again, I'm gonna still keep that because I'm a Sagittarius. I'm a type 7 Enneagram. Yes, I'll tell you the whole chart in a minute, but
I need a rising sign and all.
Oh yeah, Aries moon, Gemini rising, which I think I could talk about. But I think that is why we need to have, yes, better systems and structures, but why change the current ain't shit system that we're working in now just to make it less ain't shit? Like, why not just completely like abolish, overhaul, and like reimagine places that if the Senate is literally just going to shut things down, why do we need a Senate? Why do we need a House? And why do we need a presidency if like things are literally, and that's big scale. That's like me like going off I read a whole bunch of sci-fi novels. I read a bunch of fantasy, and I keep on just being like, okay, Tiara, like that was 300 pages ago. You need to bring it back to like here where like we're living
right now. I know that our last panel, I believe it was Jackie, she brought up like the need of modernizing the system. And they didn't really get to talk about what that might look like. And I feel like Jonathan was just like kind of talking about it as like it being strong. But like, I think for a lot of us, as we've been seeing just everything happening over the last 4 years, like our confidence in our system and like the quote unquote safety nets or what guardrails that we had are just like all kind of like being erased, and like we just feel like we're in free fall. So maybe this is a time to modernize the system, and if so, like what are things that you would like to see that, like maybe stronger or that we have?
Yeah, even at the state level, it's like having Zoom meetings so that they're literally public forums, not just on Capitol TV, where you have to know the specific link or have like access to like channel 3 at the state level and like your local like cable, making sure that people are able to access the system, making sure there is a barbecue at the state house every single year so that people feel comfortable going to the state house, know what happens there, know what the offices look like, and know it's not just some like big old scary white building with all those like fancy people in their suits every single day. It looks like accommodating for a dinner time for families who are going to testify but have young ones or need to accommodate their family schedule, having more flexible hours, having more ways for people to interact. And it's not just going to the floor and vote. It's not just testifying committee, but we also, at least in Rhode Island, from my perspective, we have an underutilized voting system. We have the highest record of folks turn out for a primary election. It was 11.4%. People just aren't voting. They're not engaged. They're not paying attention to local politics. And like, why should they? If it's something that you do every 2 years, every 4 years, if you're only voting for the governor or for the presidency, why bother? So we need to have more ways that people can interact with voting, with making their voices heard, whether it's just like a simple thing is like, what do we name this road? Do we name it like Route 1, 2, 3 or Route like 5, 6, 7? Something as simple as like getting people involved at like the municipal level, at the state level, on like making decisions about their community and getting into the practice of having their voice heard in multiple ways, whether it's a text or an email form or a Google form or like a phone call, like however people can interact. We have literally too much technology at our disposal. And the fact that, again, a global pandemic highlighted that our system was literally not set up for people to be able to see national Supreme Court decisions. Like, this was the first year that they had them recorded. Like, what you mean? It is 2020. We've had cell phones for how long?
Yeah. John, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, you know, so I'm a big fan of Du Bois, and I think in some ways Dr. King was an optimist in the way he talked about the direction in which the universe arcs and bends. But you know, Du Bois wrote Black Reconstruction, which I think is arguably his magnum opus, although he wrote so much shit that it's hard to really debate any piece as the best piece. But something that always jumps out at me about Black Reconstruction is that there were more Black folks that voted in the South in the 1830s and 40s than in the 1880s. So more Black people, free Black people that voted during slavery than after Reconstruction, and essentially the complete entrenchment of separate but equal and the Jim Crow South laws. And the reason why I bring that up is because I think we often forget that freedom and democracy is a process of expansion and contraction. So I would argue that it was probably better to be a poor person in America in 1968 than it was in 1988, towards the end of Reagan's time in office. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. And so when we think
Wait, why? I'm sorry, because I want to make sure I also make
because
that clear.
In the 1960s, we've declared war on poverty. We're trying to get rid of poverty. In the 1980s, we moved towards what Tiara would call individualism. And so Reagan paints anybody who receives government services as a Black welfare queen, despite the fact that there were more white people on welfare than Black people in total. So by 1988, we've cut a bunch of things out, and even in our own lifetime. So I was born in '89. Kids today don't watch PBS. Like, they don't know what that is. We've completely, the other countries, as they move to remote or distance learning, still had public broadcasting companies. We've privatized everything. We sold everything and are pretty underinvested in things like NPR. Like, NPR is the shit that white people listen to on the way to work. I didn't even know what NPR was, so I got to college and people are like, "Oh man, you got to really watch the show."
What?
Did you catch NPR
So,
today?
like,
Yeah.
we've systematically been underinvesting and not realizing what was happening. That our grandparents, we need to sit down and be like, what was working before, right? Why is it that the schools were less segregated 30 years ago than they are today? And so some of the reforms that we could implement include the things that you guys were talking about in the practice of governance, but also, you know, I just think that modernizing presumes that like we're somehow better now or forward, without realizing there were times we were better in the past. There were things that we were doing better in the past that worked that we should be doing. We should be building affordable housing. That stimulates an economy, and it makes the living conditions for the most vulnerable people better. We're not in the state of Rhode Island. We don't have an affordable housing line item. We take out bonds every 3 to 5 years, which we pay back with interest, which is stupid. Instead, if it's going to be a fixed cost, we should be budgeting that every year. We just had a report that came out, and this gets to kind of distance learning and access to stuff, that found that we could provide internet access to every single school-age kid in the state of Rhode Island for a little over $17 million. That's nothing in a multi-billion-dollar state budget. And we're every kid. Right. And when I first brought that up to somebody, a state lawmaker, they were like, "Oh, well, why wouldn't we just target the poor kids?" I was like, "Nah, man, because that's exactly what happens. As soon as it becomes a program for poor kids, it's on the chopping block. We're going to get rid of it. Those parents should have worked hard enough." If instead you told that middle-class white family, "Listen, you too, you get free internet too, because we know today that you have to have internet. It's a public utility. It should be treated that way. And so you need internet in order to access information, in order to engage with the world around you. $17 million ain't shit. That's nothing. Let's give it to everybody. And that's high speed, and that's highballing the price at $100 to $110 a month per house, per kid, not even per household. It would actually be less, but they over budgeted on purpose to show how cheap it would be.
Wow.
Yeah, but that's interesting because I know South Carolina, my mom's a public school teacher in South Carolina, and because schools are not, we're still practicing distance learning during the pandemic, her district gave every single family of a school-age kid $250 a month on an EBT card so that families could still afford food. They gave it to every single family. Just like you said, whether or not you were a middle-class family, you're a well-off family, or you're a low-income family who was already receiving free reduced lunch, they gave a EBT card, $250 a week for every single student. So some families were getting money, but the white families, they then said, oh, we don't want to be on EBT. We don't need this. We don't want this. So even if we give this sense of equality, I think we still have to say this is cheaper. Like there is no way you can get through. Like this is necessary for the community. This is what we are using these funds for. But I think there's still a stigma around, well, even if we're giving out handouts, what is the either moral argument, what is the financial argument that we have to give to these conservatives who they don't see it as a equality issue or an equity issue. They see it as, I don't want handouts because I'm an individual and I can do this on my own. So I think it's still bridging the gap between how do we get our communities to see that? We just need to shift the narratives from the individual to the community to everyone. We can have laws that work for every single person in our community, whether or not you are quote unquote relying on the handouts, because the handouts are coming from somewhere, like Jonathan mentioned before. The handouts are being given away at the top. So why not shift where they're going to and bring it back to your community? So then you can reinvest your money in things like your like jet ski or like the big old flat screen that you want in your like den or whatever.
Yeah, I have two questions and they're very different. But they're all somehow policing, criminalizing people. So one is about the mass hysterectomies we've been hearing about in Georgia. We know all of that's still like we're figuring out more information around that. But to me, it was significant that a Black woman was a whistleblower, and B, because like our history in America with using Black women as test subjects for female reproductive like care and stuff like that. I'll be very honest and open. I'm a descendant like of someone who is a product who's still living. Her doctor raping her mother while they were unpaid sharecroppers. So my grandmother was a slave. She's still living. She's a product of the white doctor doing tests and stuff like that on her mom, but also raping her mother and having her. So like this is something that's not new, you know, and it's for a lot of us walking around, we understand the predatory nature of like American medicine. And like there's books like Medical Apartheid that shows like all the different areas and stuff like that. So to me, it's really significant that a Black woman brought this out and is like speaking about this. But a lot of times when we think about reproductive health and the narrative the narrative is tied to white women and white women's rights. So I'd like to hear like what you might think about like when you inserting that Black women are thinking about this. Like, you know, you talked about the mortality rate of like, you know, Black women and like the child birthing like process and all that. Like we're thinking about this. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I will just bring out my like master web chart of how everything literally boils down to reproductive justice. And reproductive justice is a term coined in the 1990s by Black, brown, and indigenous folks who went to an international Geneva conference who said, enough is enough. We don't need to just have the whitewash narrative of it's about abortion rights. It's about the right to choose. It is about a family's right to choose when, how, and if they have a child. The fact that if they choose to have a child, they should have access to quality public schools, clean air, drinkable water. They should also have access to transportation to and from work, a living wage. They should also have access to all the things in which they need to provide their the family that they are hoping and willing to create, whether or not they choose to, in a world that is that has a livable wage, clean and drinkable water, and a host of other things. And that is the idea of reproductive justice. Again, coined by Black, brown, indigenous Black, brown, indigenous folks of color who came into the space and saw that the narrative was too much. We just want autonomy over our body. And as you said before, Black folks have been fighting for bodily autonomy in this country since they were the subjects of medicalization. Like the quote unquote father of modern gynecology literally used Black bodies to test whether or not modern gynecological methods were safe. He did so without making sure they had any anesthetics because quote unquote Black women had more tolerability to pain. We also know that
which we're still living through to this day. Yeah,
and we have our Puerto Rican sisters and indigenous sisters and siblings who are the products of testing hormonal birth control at 4 times the recommended dose when we already knew what the recommended dose should have been. So we have communities that have experienced this, and it ignores the fact that when we say reproductive justice, it's not just about choice narratives. It's not just about access narratives. It's even after we have access, do we have the resources in our communities to make sure our children are not, when they turn 12 years old, seen as thugs, seen as criminals, imported into the prison industrial system, shot in the streets dead, so that they're not seen as overly sexualized at the age of 9, 10. We're not putting them through a system where they're constantly being told, diminish your character, assimilate to this, keep your hair straight. That is what the justice narrative is. It's like we can have choice, we can have financial access, but until we actually recognize that there is no true reproductive choice for a person and a family of color that has to make the decision between having one child that can be ripped away from them for several different reasons by the time they're 8 to 12 years old, and having to choose between a livable future, whether that's clean air, a livable wage, quality education, and a just criminal system that doesn't see them as predators. And I think that's what I committed. That is all Black and brown and indigenous women who are saying that. The 1990s, they were like, yo, we are doing this. And I came into my organizer voice and my organizer space through the reproductive justice movement. It was the first time I had seen people who looked like me, Black queer women, fighting for not just bodily autonomy, but autonomy to move and exist in a world and see that same world that they can have future generations live and exist in.
Yep. So we have a few more minutes before, because I know I would hop us into another deeper conversation. Are there any things that I didn't cover that you felt like, oh, I wish I was able to share with people? I'm glad that y'all dropped your links for how people can contribute and donate. But other topics that like we should be thinking about right now.
I would just say that folks should get involved. As much as you can individually, and that might mean running for office, which would be fucking dope. But it also means phone banking. If you can't go outside, it means canvassing. Like we pulled out some really big wins that kind of shocked the establishment here and that got some national news coverage. And I think what the press didn't acknowledge enough was how grassroots it was. And we tend to think of grassroots as like, oh, all these people, meeting in a church basement and being like, and no, it's not like that. It's regular ass people like getting a phone bank list from Smart Van and like dialing away or going out with 3 or 4 people to go knock on doors and get people to come out. And so there's ways to get involved. And if you do a thing, it would really move the needle forward, because there's a lot of people thinking about doing a thing. And a lot of people doing a thing, it's like a big thing. That's not very articulate, but I hope it got the point across. Tiara, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to recognize that there is literally a space for everyone. You do not have to be an extrovert. You do not have to be a JavaScript master. You do not have to be a digital designer. You can be literally the most introverted person in the world, social anxiety. Your perfect role for you, and I did this on my campaign, I'm like, the perfect role for you is writing out handwritten postcards to every single neighbor. If you've got beautiful handwriting, but you don't have the time, just sit in front of your TV and just start hand addressing some mailers for me. If you don't have the time, repost, share, talk to your network. Even just following, liking, and like commenting on a Facebook post literally goes so far to get the clout factor up there. I don't know if that's like a social media thing, but like literally I went from having like 300 followers to having over 3,000 followers just because I had a strong network of people who were like, I don't have money, what can I do? And I was like, yo, repost that tweet, like go, like send it out. Send out my links. Tell your friends, because you probably have someone down the line, a second, third connection, a fourth connection, who's like, I got $50 to send this way. I got $5 on it. Like, that's how grassroots work. And there's literally a role for everyone. Don't have digital design skills? Can you just literally be the intern in charge of like retweeting dope people? Here's a list of like, just like retweet literally AOC. Like that is your job as an intern. Do you have the ability to like, just like respond to DMs and questions, etc.? Do you know how to use Squarespace? Those are all roles that don't really require much quote unquote skills, but are super critical. If you want to join a new grassroots organization, one of the best ways that you can do that is volunteering to take notes, volunteering to update their Facebook page, doing things that are low lift that get you involved. And that's your entryway into more leadership roles, or bringing your friends along. A lot of people are afraid to go things alone. These events are typically fun, have food. It's a way to make new friends outside of like Tinder. It's a way to meet someone outside of Tinder. It hasn't worked for me yet, so no promises there actually. But there's so many different ways that you can get involved and have a role in your community. And when we know our community, we are more likely to continue to show up to the next thing and hear about the next thing, and then know what's happening.
Corey's so funny. Thank you. I know we have like one more minute, but I will not get us to anything else. I just want to tell you all I appreciate you all so much for joining us, for making time. I know you're really busy. I know you're out there trying to get those votes up. Hopefully, our community will be able to help you all share this with this session with other people and share your information. And like, I hope you all come back, join us. John, I might hit you up about that podcast because I think that's a really great idea. And after this, we have our conversation with Black men talking about how they're thinking about the election. And our last panel will be on police reform from people from all over the country. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Have a good
one. My pleasure.
Yo. Oh, I guess we're recording. I'll text you back. I got a funny one.
Yeah.